A little black girl walked into the office and asked, "Where can I buy a dad?" The millionaire CEO froze, then cried. What she did next didn't just break the silence. It changed everything. "Stay with us. You need to see this." She didn't cry. She didn't fidget. She didn't even blink when the morning sun spilled through the towering glass atrium of Crosswell Capital and lit up her tiny figure, sitting cross-legged on the cold marble floor. Her leggings were threadbare at the knees. Her hoodie was faded, with a tiny tear in the seam near her shoulder. Her backpack was patched in 3 different places, one strap safety pinned, one zipper missing a tab. And still, there she was, a 6-year-old girl with the composure of a litigator, her deep, unblinking brown eyes locked squarely onto the lobby's main security camera, as if daring it to look away first. One guard took a step forward, his hand near his radio, ready to intervene. But then she spoke. Her voice cut through the polished air, small but firm. "I'm here for Mr. Damon Cross. My mom said I'd find him here." The receptionist froze mid-keystroke. A manager was summoned. Security hesitated, unsure if this was a welfare check, a test, or a trap. One supervisor bent down and tried to coax out a parent's name, a phone number, anything. But all the girl repeated, gently, insistently, was, "I'm here for Mr. Cross." She didn't look lost. She looked like someone on the edge of a life-changing decision. She sat perfectly upright, feet crossed, hands gripping the backpack to her chest as if it held the weight of her entire world. She looked expectant. Then the elevator chimed. Damon Cross emerged in a tailored navy suit, flanked by his assistants and legal advisors. His watch gleamed. His steps were time-cut, his voice mid-instruction as he passed the front desk, until he saw her. Or rather, until she looked directly at him. Like she had been waiting for him all morning. Like she knew him. He stopped walking. The others noticed the shift and turned. He approached slowly, not out of caution, but confusion. Like a man walking into a room he didn't remember building. He crouched down, tension in his shoulders, and asked, "Are you lost?" She stared into him with calm clarity and replied, "Where can I buy a dad?" Silence tore through the lobby. Phones froze mid-scroll. A few quarters rolled out of someone's vending machine snack, and no one bent to retrieve them. Even the elevator closed itself without a passenger. No one moved. The sentence had landed like a bomb. "My name's Lonnie," she added, pulling out a dented, scuffed tin box from her backpack. Coins clattered inside, nickels, dimes, quarters, even $2 bills folded in fourths. She placed it gently on the receptionist's marble counter. A few coins spilled and rolled beneath the polished front desk. "I've been saving," she explained, still not breaking eye contact. "My mom said dads are expensive, especially the kind that disappear." Damon blinked once, then again. His brain searched for a rational explanation, a setup, a viral stunt, a PR ambush. But her eyes didn't lie. There was no performance in her tone. There was no script, just a question that split his world in two. His assistant leaned toward him and whispered, "Do you want me to call child services?" "No," Damon said, his voice low. "She came for me." He held out his hand. She took it, like it was the most natural thing in the world. As they walked down the hall of glass walls and executive portraits, Lonnie looked up at one of Damon's framed photographs. She tilted her head and murmured, "He looked taller in the photo. Maybe they made you shrink." Damon almost smiled. Almost. When they arrived at the 41st floor boardroom, normally reserved for quarterly summits, billion-dollar pivots, and lawyers with golden cufflinks, Lonnie climbed into a leather chair like she belonged there. She kicked her feet under the polished table, then folded her hands over the backpack and met his eyes again. "My mom used to work here," she said. "Her name was Celia Monroe. She was in the legal department, the floor with the wooden doors that open like safes." Damon's throat clenched. The name didn't just ring a bell. It detonated it. Lanny reached into her backpack again and pulled out a faded faxed copy of an HR document. A maternity leave request, red-stamped, rejected. At the bottom, just legible beneath the faded toner lines, was his own signature. He stared at the paper, his mind trying to bridge years he had buried under progress and stock price. He pressed the intercom on the conference table. "Grace," he said, his voice tighter than he intended, "I need the sealed employee file for Celia Monroe. No excuses. Pull it from archive, encrypted or not." A pause. Too long. Then Grace's voice came through the speaker, brittle and shaking. "Sir, that file doesn't exist anymore." Damon didn't react, not externally, but something in the pit of his chest began to twist. Across the table, Lonnie sat quietly, fingers tapping the edge of her box of coins. She didn't press. She didn't plead. She had already asked the only question that mattered. And now Damon Cross, a man who built empires by answering only to himself, realized that somewhere along the way, someone had answered for him, and that answer had disappeared. The moment Grace's voice crackled through the intercom. "Sir, that file doesn't exist anymore." Damon Cross spun toward his desk terminal like a man chasing a ghost. The holographic interface flickered to life beneath his fingers, pulsing in quiet blue as he typed a sequence reserved only for top-tier executive access. Then it flashed red. "Employee file CM413, erased, access forbidden, classification, legal hazard, red level. Erased, not archived, not transferred, erased." He stared, heart thudding against a silence too loud to ignore. 7 years ago, Celia Monroe had been one of the brightest minds in legal. Sharp, unflinching, revered. She had led the Galloway arbitration like a general. Then, while he was away in Tokyo negotiating billion-dollar partnerships across time zones, she was gone, vanished. No resignation letter, no farewell drinks, just an HR footnote, voluntarily resigned. But that wasn't the whole truth. Not anymore. Not with her daughter sitting in his boardroom hours earlier, clutching a tin can of coins and asking to buy a dad. In the elevator, silence wrapped around them like glass. Damon finally broke it. "Why did your mom send you here, Laney?" She didn't glance his way. "She said if she couldn't breathe anymore, I should go find the man who made her stop singing." The words cracked something behind his ribs. He nodded, unable to respond, and signaled his driver with a single tilt of the head. "Take us," he murmured, holding open the car door. Laney handed him a damp, crumpled slip of paper. The ink was smeared, like someone had held it too long with trembling hands. The address meant nothing to him. He'd lived in this city for 20 years, but the street name was foreign, tucked far from corporate skylines and cocktail galas. The car rolled into a neighborhood where time had given up. Pavement was fractured, wires hung like vines. A broken staircase bore spray-painted warnings. Out of order. And yet the little girl beside him moved forward with the precision of someone following a path she knew by heart. They reached the third floor, a door with no number, no bell, just chipped paint and silence. Laney knocked 3 times, soft, rhythmic, familiar. As if she wasn't just knocking, but calling something back to life. The door creaked open a few inches. From inside came the sterile sting of disinfectant, mingled with the faint sweetness of jasmine tea long cold. A shadow stirred. Celia Monroe lay curled on a threadbare couch, half lit by a dusty window. Her hair had thinned into wisps, her skin paled by illness, her arm lined with bruises from IVs. But her eyes hadn't dulled at all. They locked on Damon with a kind of recognition that hurt. "I thought you died," she rasped, her voice sanded raw. "Or maybe I just wished you had." A single machine beeped in uneven rhythm, the only sound beside the heaviness in his chest. Laney sat beside her mother, resting a small hand on her forearm. "I found him," she whispered. "He's not as tall as you said." Celia tried to sit up. Her body crumpled. The monitor screamed. Instinct overrode memory. Damon surged forward, lifting her into his arms. Her body weighed less than a breath, but the history between them dragged heavy as stone. He thundered down the stairs, shouting for help. Doors opened. Faces appeared. An elderly woman gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "That's him," she whispered. "That's the man she talked about in her sleep." The ambulance arrived in minutes. Paramedics swarmed. Lonnie didn't cry. She didn't panic. Instead, she slipped quietly back into the apartment and returned clutching a small wooden box, its corners worn soft by time. In the back of the ambulance, she opened the lid and placed it on Damon's lap like an offering. Inside, a faded employee badge, edges curled, Celia's name barely legible beneath peeling plastic. A black and white sonogram, bold text underneath, unnamed, father unknown, and a sealed envelope, yellowed and delicate. The front read, "To DC, if you ever look back." Damon opened it, hands trembling like a man disarming a bomb. But it wasn't the contents of the letter that knocked the wind from his chest. It was the scrawled handwriting on the back of the ultrasound. "You're not supposed to exist, but you do." The ambulance doors slammed shut. The sirens wailed into the night. Damon didn't move. He stood frozen in the sterile corridor of the ER, the letter fluttering in his hand like a verdict written too late. Doctors barked orders. Nurses passed clipboards. None of it registered. All he heard was the echo of her voice, older now, tired, but still powerful enough to knock down the man he'd built himself into. And all he could think, over and over, as the truth buried itself beneath his skin, was one sentence that had no answer. She never even told me. Damon's fingers hovered above the executive override panel in his private terminal. He typed in the highest access code he had, his personal failsafe. The screen blinked, then the entire interface bled red. Unauthorized inquiry detected. Admin lockout initiated. Before he could react, his office phone buzzed. Grace's voice trembled through the intercom. Sir, the Legal Oversight Board is on line 1. They said they were notified of a breach. He didn't answer. His pulse was hammering. He grabbed his phone instead and called Grace directly. Pull every internal email and document mentioning Celia Monroe from 2016. She hesitated. Damon, that chain was sealed. 3 board members locked it through ethics committee protocol. You'll need a full override. His voice was stone. Then get me a security team. Off the books. I want every log, every internal memo, every deleted fragment back in front of me. Within the hour, Damon had hired an elite digital forensics team, not just IT. These were the kind of professionals Fortune 500s called when data needed resurrection or burial. As they worked, Damon returned to the hospital. He paused at the door. Inside the room, Lanny sat cross-legged on a reclining chair, folding paper stars. Each one was a different color. She placed them gently, one by one, on Celia's chest. Every star is a wish, she whispered. I'm helping Mommy remember she's still worth it. Damon stood there, silent, one hand gripping the handle of his briefcase like it might steady the ache growing in his chest. He had commanded boardrooms, silenced senators, outmaneuvered billionaires. But this small girl, with glue-sticky fingers and unwavering eyes, was remaking the room without saying a word to him. Celia stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, pale and exhausted. She locked eyes with Damon, her breath shallow but steady. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. Her reply was soft. You were gone. By the time I found out, the people you trusted had already made me disappear. He didn't speak. Couldn't. She turned her head slowly. They said if I kept the baby, they'd call it unethical optics. Said I violated the executive code of conduct. She gave a dry chuckle. They threatened to drag me through a morality clause. So I refused to quit. And the next day, my badge didn't work. Back at headquarters, the digital forensics team uncovered a string of encrypted files. 3 executive signatures had authorized the deletion. Wipe risk asset CM413, no compensation. Damon read it once, then again. The initials beside the signatures chilled him. They were people he had mentored, promoted, trusted. But that wasn't the worst part. The team also recovered an audio file. In a cold, detached boardroom voice, someone said, if she keeps that baby, we'll have a lawsuit. Shut her down. Quietly. Damon couldn't breathe. That night he printed the transcript. It sat on his mahogany desk as he stared at it in silence. This office, this empire, had once been his pride. Now it was the reason the woman he once loved had disappeared. Erased, not just from the system, but from every corridor of memory within the company. And her daughter had come back to remind them both that truth, like paper stars, could still float above the wreckage. The next morning, Damon made a decision. He didn't take them back to the penthouse above the skyline. He took them home. Not his old home, a new one, a quiet villa beyond the noise of the city, green yard, wind chimes, trees whispering second chances. Celia was transferred by private ambulance. He had a medical suite installed, along with the best recovery equipment money could buy. There were fresh-cut flowers in every room and jazz playing softly from a record player, her favorite Coltrane album looping through the halls. Lonnie was given her own room, complete with shelves of art supplies and watercolor-stained floors. She pinned a drawing to the wall, done in her careful crayon scrawl. We were broken, but not erased. Later that evening, as Damon walked past her room, he paused at the doorway. Celia's old Libra necklace, silver, with tiny etched scales, hung now on Laney's neck. The same necklace Celia had worn the first time they met, at a dinner in Florence, where she out-argued 2 attorneys, and left him speechless. He stepped in slowly. Lanny was painting. The sun dipped behind the window, casting gold across her cheeks. She didn't look up. "If you knew back then," she asked quietly, "would you have stopped them?" Damon swallowed. His lips parted, but no words came. He just stood there, hands trembling slightly as the little girl dipped her brush back into gold and kept painting. And his silence said everything. Damon sat awkwardly in the tiny plastic chair, knees nearly touching his chest. Around him, crayon drawings wallpapered the preschool walls, dragons with lopsided wings, suns with purple smiles. But one stood out. A picture of three people holding hands beneath a cloudy sky, with the words scrawled in red crayon. "My dad came from the clouds, but he stayed." The teacher held up the drawing and smiled. "That's high praise for someone who just showed up." All eyes turned to Damon. He cleared his throat, straightened his blazer, then gave up and just nodded. When the teacher asked him to say a few words during the parent circle, he rose stiffly and muttered, "She's my daughter. I'm learning." It wasn't eloquent, but it was the most honest sentence he'd said in months, and the only one that mattered to Lanny, who beamed at him like he'd won a Nobel. Back home, Damon rewrote his life, one sticky note at a time. 6:45 a.m. Try to braid hair. YouTube tutorials were harder than mergers. 7:15. Pancakes attempt number 7. Burnt again. 8 a.m. Walk her to school. No Bentley allowed, per Laney's decree. That car's for villains, Daddy. Every step was a stumble, but they were his stumbles, and she noticed. On one particularly chaotic morning, when his fingers fumbled with Lonnie's shoelaces, she patted his shoulder and whispered, "It's okay, Daddy. You're good at contracts, not knots." Celia watched from the hallway, her arms folded, a soft smile tugging at her lips. Later that evening, she wrote in her journal, "He's trying harder than anyone I've ever known." Their rhythm became imperfectly perfect. One evening, when Celia was too weak to read bedtime stories, Lanny handed the book to Damon. "You do it, and do the princess voice like Mommy, British, but the shark should be Southern." Damon blinked. "A British princess and a Southern shark?" "That's the law," Lanny said, arms crossed like a tiny judge. He obeyed. Badly. Lanny laughed so hard she snorted, and even Celia, exhausted on the couch, smiled with her eyes half closed. Week by week, Damon filled the house with little things that weren't little at all. He hired a watercolor teacher for Laney and secretly joined the sessions. When the lesson was about painting emotions, Damon painted silence. The teacher didn't say a word but nodded with something that felt like understanding. Celia, meanwhile, began to write again. For the first time in years, she turned on soft jazz instead of keeping the blinds shut. She brewed tea instead of reaching for painkillers. The pages came slowly, but they came. Words from a place in her that hadn't spoken in years. And then one morning, Damon disappeared for hours. When he returned, he placed a wooden box on Celia's desk. Inside was a single reprinted copy of the novel she once gave him, their first year together. Pages gently rebound, cover etched with a quiet inscription, "To the fire who refused to go out." She held the book like a heartbeat, didn't speak, just ran her fingers over the spine again and again. She didn't need to say anything. He already knew. Dinner that night felt almost ordinary. They laughed over Laney's dramatic retelling of a playground debate about which crayon was best, cerulean versus jungle green. Then as Damon cleared the dishes, Laney blurted, "Why don't you and Mommy kiss like in cartoons?" Celia choked on her water. Damon dropped his spoon. Silence fell like confetti. Then Celia laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a breath-stealing, shoulder-shaking laugh. Damon joined her. The moment passed, and something in the room softened. A wall, long untouched, cracked a little. Later that night, they sat on the porch, wrapped in the late spring breeze. For the first time in years, Celia reached for Damon's hand. Her fingers were still thin, still trembling, but they were sure. He didn't speak. He just held on. Held her like a man who almost lost his chance to be held at all. The next morning, Damon received an email, an invitation to speak at a major gala focused on single mothers and corporate reintegration programs. He stared at it for a long time, unmoving. He had been invited not as a CEO, not as an investor, but as a father, a real one. He printed it and left it on the kitchen table. That afternoon, Lanny found it. She added her own note, scribbled in purple crayon on the back. "You should tell them." Maybe other kids can find their dads too. Damon stood in the hallway staring at the message. Lainey was outside planting paper flowers in the dirt, humming to herself. Inside, Celia was journaling, soft music floating from her room like a new kind of quiet. He walked into the sunroom where Celia was seated. She looked up. "If I stand up," he said quietly, "and say it all, will you be okay?" Celia placed her pen down. She took a breath that wasn't shallow. "If it sets even one person free, say it loud." Her voice didn't waver, and neither would his. The lights dimmed. A hush swept across the ballroom. No music, no introductions, no blinking spotlights. Just one man, one stage, and one piece of paper in his trembling hand. Damon Cross stepped up to the podium, suit crisp but collar slightly askew, like he had dressed in a rush but paused long enough to remember what mattered. He unfolded the paper slowly. It wasn't a speech. It was a crayon drawing, a child's portrait of three figures under a cloudy sky, purple words wobbling beneath. "Can I keep you forever?" Damon looked at the faces in the room, executives, lawmakers, journalists, survivors, and then he said softly, "I once thought no one could buy me, but a little girl with a tin full of coins proved me wrong." A ripple moved through the crowd like wind through tall grass, then silence, deep and expectant. "She walked into my building," Damon continued, voice steady now. "She didn't flinch at the marble floors or the glass walls. She wore a hoodie 2 sizes too big, her backpack half open, her shoes mismatched. But her eyes, they held more focus than any boardroom I've ever sat in." He paused, and she asked the one question none of us were ready for. "Where can I buy a dad?" A collective intake of breath. Some gasped. A few covered their mouths. More looked away. Damon didn't raise his voice. He didn't cry. He let the gravity of the moment do its work. She wasn't there to ask for a favor. She didn't come with tears. She came with purpose. Her mother had once worked in my company and vanished. He let that word sit. Vanished. Not laid off, not transferred, not retired, just erased. And I let it happen. I was away on deals, on jets, at tables where everyone spoke in bottom lines and no one spoke her name. He didn't say Celia's name right away. He didn't have to. But when he finally did, Celia Monroe, it broke the spell. Whispers erupted. Someone in the third row dropped their pen. Another reached for tissues. "I'm not here to assign blame," Damon said, "but silence has its cost. And I paid mine the moment a little girl looked at me and decided I could be something I never knew I wanted to be." 4 hours later, where Can I Buy Dad was everywhere. TikTokers were stitching the phrase onto videos of found families. Twitter lit up with polarized reactions. Some hailed Damon, a CEO brave enough to own his mess. Others demanded investigations. How many other Celias vanished at Crosswell Capital? Major outlets pulled old HR complaints. A forgotten memo from 7 years ago resurfaced, flagging an irregular dismissal. Headlines ran, "The Girl Who Made Wall Street Listen." Crosswell Capital's board held an emergency meeting. Damon was summoned. Some suggested he walk it back, issue a polished statement. Instead, he handed over his resignation as chairman. "I'll serve as an unpaid advisor," he said, "but I'm done being the kind of man who shows up last." At home, Celia sat in bed, laptop on her knees. She watched the clip, Damon's voice shaky, holding that drawing like it was a lifeline. Her fingers hovered over her journal, then moved to the keyboard. Her blog, long dormant, blinked to life. She didn't edit. She didn't revise. She wrote with raw honesty, "The day my daughter bought the truth." In 48 hours, it reached over 2 million reads. People left comments from Thailand, Nigeria, Argentina. A mother in Kentucky wrote, "I wish my child had a voice like that." A man in Berlin commented, "Your story found me just in time." Publishers called. One offered a book deal with film rights pending. Celia hesitated, then typed, "Only if Damon gets to read the first draft first." A week later, he took her to the little bookstore she used to visit after work, the one with creaky floorboards and a cat named Marcus asleep by the window. There, on a wooden shelf labeled New Voices, stood a single copy of her book, title embossed, cover sketched from Laney's crayon clouds. Damon touched it gently, like it might melt under his fingers. Outside, they walked past the cafe she used to write in, her old table now occupied by a college student mouthing lines from a poetry book. Lanny skipped ahead, spinning like a ballerina with crooked socks. I told my friends we're more famous than Mickey Mouse, she announced, chest puffed. Celia bent over laughing. Damon smirked. I don't think Mickey saw this coming. The sun dipped low, casting gold across the park's iron benches. It was the same park Celia once sat in, waiting for a man who never showed. Now she walked beside that man, her hand in his, not hesitant but sure. She stopped beneath a blooming dogwood tree and looked up at him. Do you still want what you said back then? Something legal? Something real? Damon didn't speak. His throat tightened. He glanced at Lanny, twirling through falling petals like each one was her crown. Then he looked back at Celia and simply squeezed her hand. Firm, steady. She smiled. He didn't let go. And somewhere inside him, something old and heavy finally broke, but not apart. Open. The knife paused mid-slice. Damon, sleeves rolled up and softly humming along with the radio, looked down at the fruit in his hands, then at the small figure now standing at the kitchen island. Lanny had placed a drawing on the table, another masterpiece in her signature chaotic style. This one showed 4 stick figures, 2 big ones holding hands, a little girl with curly hair, and inside the belly of the woman, a tiny heart wearing a golden crown. Damon blinked. What's this? Lonnie shrugged, completely matter-of-fact. If we can buy dads, can we order babies too? From the hallway, Celia burst into laughter, her voice echoing down the warm morning air. She entered in pajama shorts, one hand holding a cup of tea, the other resting protectively on her belly. We'll talk about that, maybe in a few years. A week later, Damon stood in the middle of the old park, the one where Celia had once waited for him with a letter that never got read. He came early this time, earlier than the wind, earlier than the regret. In his pocket was a small handkerchief wrapped around a modest silver ring. No diamonds, no spectacle, just a quiet promise forged in everything they had survived. Celia walked toward him slowly, a shawl over her shoulders, the light breeze tugging at the corners of her dress. When she reached him, Damon didn't kneel. He didn't need to. He held out the handkerchief and unwrapped it and whispered, You gave me a second chance. Let me give you my first promise. She didn't cry. She smiled, and that was louder than any yes. The wedding was nothing like Wall Street expected. It didn't happen in a ballroom or under a chandelier. It unfolded in the backyard of Damon's modest new home in the suburbs, a house with chipped paint and real wind chimes. The flowers were handmade by Lanny out of colored paper. The wedding cake was a TikTok experiment. The guest list? Celia's old neighbor, the driver who still insisted on calling Damon Sir, Grace from HR who now insisted on hugging instead of shaking hands, and a handful of nurses who'd cried when Celia first left the hospital on her own 2 feet. In his vows, Damon looked at Celia and said, Most people think building companies is hard, but being present for breakfast, that's harder and better. As music played and the backyard twinkled with string lights, Damon surprised everyone by lifting Lanny into the air and spinning her in a slow, joyful circle. You found me first, he said. Celia, standing in the corner near the lemon tree, covered her mouth. Her eyes brimmed, not with sadness, but with the kind of relief that only comes after long silence. She whispered to herself, She made us a family before we even knew how to be one. Later that night, after the laughter faded and the last of the paper lanterns burned out, Damon walked into his new home office and placed a single item on the wall. Laney's first drawing, the one with the 3 stick figures and the crayon clouds. It had crumples now, a small juice stain in one corner, but it held the weight of everything. Below it, he mounted a small wooden plaque, hand-carved, no branding, no title, just, everything began when a little black girl walked into an office and asked the one question no one was ready to hear. Time passed, not fast, not slow, but just right. Damon adjusted to his new title, board advisor and father. He still took morning meetings, but never before school drop-offs. He still reviewed contracts, but only after bedtime stories. One afternoon, Lanny walked in with a new friend, a shy boy with big eyes and shoes too clean to be comfortable. This is my family, she said proudly. We're kind of weird, but we're perfect weird. Damon and Celia shared a glance across the room, not the kind of look that needed words, the kind that said, we made it here, somehow. In the garden behind the house, the late sunlight turned the air gold. Laney ran barefoot through the grass, arms stretched like wings, a scarf trailing behind her like a comet. Her laughter rose into the sky, unburdened by what it took to get there. On the back steps, Damon and Celia sat side by side, hands brushing, hearts beating slower now, but stronger. No camera, no audience, just them. Celia leaned her head on his shoulder and sighed. Damon didn't speak. He didn't have to. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Full of the question that changed everything. Full of the answer that finally arrived. And in that still, sunlit moment, with the wind gently lifting the corners of Lonnie's scarf, they both knew life can go off beat, but it never chooses the wrong people. Sometimes it takes a little black girl with one impossible question, where can I buy a dad, to wake a millionaire CEO in his own office and remind us what truly matters. This wasn't just about wealth or power. It was about showing up, staying, and choosing love over silence. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe. More true to the heart stories are on the way. And now we're wondering, have you ever seen someone ask the question no one dared to voice? Have you ever watched an office become a home because a child demanded the truth? We want to hear from you. Thanks for watching. See you in the next story.